Hello, it's Mary Amber again, and today, in this video, I kind of want to just go over the idea that our generation, the newer generations, the younger people of today, are no worse than they were years ago, decades ago, centuries ago, for that matter. Throughout time, there are a lot of changes. One, people change. And two, population grows. And three, technology changes along with the people. And guess what? Today, we have much greater access to information and media than we ever have had before. And in the future, we will have even more. The population has grown. It may grow for a time, until it eventually declines or whatever happens. So what you have with this is you have more people, and you have more access to knowledge. And what this creates is an illusion that things are getting worse. You have news media that likes to cover negative news. You might see the same thing covered more than once. You see it all the time, whether you're on TV or you're on the internet. You're going to see some form of news, and it's going to probably be coming right at you. And, my parents' generation, they had TV. They didn't have the internet. And even before that, radio. You'll hear news, but you're not going to hear as much. And it's not as covered as frequently. Same thing with the TV. And also, too, I think different generations have a view, like, there were some things that just weren't talked about in the days of our parents. The baby boomer generation, or even the generations before that. Some things were not talked about. Some things... my video went out. So yeah, again, some things were just not talked about. Some things were not felt appropriate to talk about. I know people in their 60s who've been molested by family members. And there's always been violence. Always. You can't really go back in time in history and not find a generation that didn't have some violence in it. Some delinquency, some... anything. It's all there. It's all there. Like, okay, teen pregnancies for one, In my mother's day, it was common. It wasn't like widespread, but it was common enough to where, they knew people who, had gotten pregnant. It was hush-hush. People kept it on the down low and did what they had to do to kind of... because it wasn't really smiled on. Views have changed a little bit now, and that's one reason why you see it's more commonly heard of. One, and two, it's just saying it's more common is just more. Not everyone looks down on it as much as they did back then, and sometimes it was to the detriment of the person who was having the child. So that's a long story too. But not even just that. The violence, the gangs, roaring 20s, gangs have been around for a while. The faces have changed, races and different groups, in gangs. But guess what? They've been around. Go back to the Wild West days. And you got your own little gangs, kind of, pretty much, maybe not call that. And also you got a lot of crime back then. And that's another thing. You look back in the old days, and there was plenty of crime. There's plenty of wrongdoing. And this whole belief that if you don't hit your child, that your child's not gonna, that your child's gonna end up a criminal. Well, guess what? It doesn't stop them from becoming criminals. If that were the case, because spanking and hitting and beating and really beating your child, even back in the days, was very common, there was still crime. It was still crime. Still happened. Still happened. And some crime isn't really a crime. It all has to do with the laws. some laws are unfair, women can't vote, you broke the law, But now we're like, psh, what the heck was that, or black people can't eat in a certain restaurant, psh, what was that? Perfectly acceptable to break those laws. But not even going there. Not even going into breakable laws. But, segregation, for one thing. I'm glad I don't live in a segregated society. I think that's a positive thing. I'm at least it's not legally sanctioned. Like, and wife beating, that's not legally sanctioned anymore. Thank you. That's great. I can vote now. That's wonderful. How can people say things are getting worse? Not everything's getting worse. Things have always been just as bad as they've always been. That sounds funny. But it's true. There really is no difference. Besides the things that changed that we discussed earlier. And if you're one of these generations who tend to be like, my generation was so much better than yours, you need to go back, look at history, and look at the times during when you were a child, or when you were born, or even when you were kind of growing up, and see, like, all the history, and not just from your view what you remember, because that doesn't count. Because you're not taking in everybody else's view of today. That doesn't count. You gotta take in the whole picture. So if you're, born during the 50s and 60s, you gotta look at segregation. Even if it didn't happen in your area, it still happened during that time. So it's still an issue. Just because you didn't experience it didn't mean it didn't happen. Just like all the people that are experiencing good things that you might not think are good, or that you're not experiencing. So it might be subjective, but things are not getting worse. Some things can get better. Things are slow to change, for sure. It's just, I guess, what you think is bad and horrible. But you gotta realize that every generation, every single one, older generation has looked upon the new generation and shook their heads and said, no, what's going on with the world today? Oh, kids today. They've all said that. They've all done it. And guess what? It's been okay. And, people just gotta get used to it. And just with these lame excuses that they use, to kind of justify that reasoning that things are getting worse, just aren't really logical. They're just based on what that person remembers and what that person deems acceptable. And they really need to dig out a history book. That's all I'm saying. Because things were a lot worse back then. That's how I feel. It may not have been, but, legally, I think they were. So, you really don't have an argument. It's really just not a very logical one.